Hello, small, helpless patrons, and welcome to GrooveMaster's Real World. Halloween can be a freaky-deaky kind of day that can take a stone-faced, groovy fox and turn them into a bugged-out turkey. Maybe it's the gags and scares from clowns dressed in spooky rags. Maybe it's the stories that you tell or read. Scares and nightmares are regulated to stories and things that don't exist. Spooks and ghouls that dance and scream in our imaginations. But the real world can be much scarier. Here are some unsettling real-world events that happened on Halloween. In 1837, a steamboat called the Monmouth, packed and overcrowded with upwards to 700 Native Americans, diverted from the normal flow of traffic and crashed into an oncoming boat. The Monmouth was ripped in two, and roughly 300 of the natives on board were killed. Now, the natives were being transported to Arkansas, where they would then be forced to march to what is present-day Oklahoma, as part of the Indian Removal Act of 1830, which in turn spawned the Trail of Tears. Just so we can establish the horrible context in which this horrible story took place. Why exactly the Monmouth diverted its path can be explained by a few things. The weather wasn't in the best conditions. It had been storming, and it was in the dead of night. The city it was passing, Baton Rouge, didn't have adequate lighting, which means that the Monmouth was piloting blindly down the river. And, perhaps to add insult to injury, the crew had dipped into the whiskey barrels being held at the back of the boat. There are a few things to learn from this story, patrons. Make sure driving conditions are safe for you to travel. Don't drink and drive. And maybe don't forcibly remove an entire people from their homeland. The Spanish flu was a worldwide pandemic with mysterious origins, and created a time of conspiracy theories, mask mandates, adherence, and deterrence. It's a good thing none of the negative aspects of going through a global pandemic have transferred over to the one we are currently experiencing. Isn't it, patrons? By the time the Spanish flu had ended, 675,000 Americans had died of it. And October of 1918 was one of the worst months for cases. You see, in October of that year alone, roughly 195,000 people had died from the Spanish flu, and Halloween of that year marked the first decline in the number of deaths and infections. Though there would be an insurgence after November 11th's declaration of armistice. Did I mention that World War I was still happening during this time? Well, between the pandemic and the war, life expectancy in America went from 51 to 39. History doesn't repeat itself, patrons, but it does echo. The Blackshirt fascist march on Rome was a culmination of discontent spread among the middle class, partnered with fear of a socialist uprising, and the disappointment at what Italy gained after World War I. Fascist party leaders planned an insurrection for October 28th, where the fascist party and their supporters would march on Rome. Meanwhile, Benito Mussolini was waiting in Milan to see how things would play out. With the horde of fascists steadily approaching Rome, the Prime Minister Luigi Facta ordered a state of siege for Rome. This would have restricted movement within the city and given the Roman army the ability to arrest the Blackshirts without charges or warrants. However, the king refused to sign the document declaring Rome to be in a state of siege. Mussolini then traveled to Rome by train to demand the government of Rome. With him at the head, the king consented and asked him to form a cabinet. A day before the march on Rome, Mussolini had his leaders plan a parade for his followers in celebration of the transfer of power and fascist rule in Italy. Erich Weiss was a Hungarian-born illusionist, known for his daring escape acts as Harry Houdini. He also did stunts with piloting and acting, and dropped his friend Arthur Conan Doyle over whether ghosts, mediums, and psychics were real. I'll leave you to look up who was the spiritualist and who wasn't. He inspired wonder in fascinated crowds, led many to become illusionists themselves, and tended to make people faint at his dangerous acts. But no one could save him from a college kid with a heck of a jab. Included in Houdini's arsenal of tricks was his ability to take a punch to the gut without even flinching. However, Houdini would have to prepare for this feat with a few exercises so he wouldn't sustain too much injury. One night, before a performance, two college students entered Houdini's dressing room and asked the illusionist if he really could get punched in the stomach and not feel a thing. Houdini replied that he could if he were prepared. Maybe the student that landed 4 hard licks to his stomach had it out for him. Maybe he thought that meant Houdini was all ready to go. But right after Houdini had answered, the student basically signed his death certificate. After the punches to the gut, Houdini spent the night in complete agony, all the while refusing to see a doctor until the next morning. Houdini's appendix had ruptured, and he consented to have it removed, but the damage was done. And on October 31st, 1926, Erich Weiss, the great Harry Houdini, died. The sentiments of Halloween and history often go hand in hand. They can both produce feelings of terror and dreadful anticipation about what is going to happen in the future. Remember,
the GrooveMaster! Feed the negative! Only way to stop! Bicep!